I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you about the way of non-resistance. You know, we think that in our lives we have to struggle and fight and do all kinds of things to get by in life, but in fact, what we really need to do is to move through a conscious awareness of non-resistance, not resisting the circumstances and situations of life, but going with the flow. And of course, that sounds very trite, but it is an easier way of life, isn't it? If we would just begin to be non-resistant to the difficulties and challenges.
Yes, and great spiritual leaders and national leaders of countries have shown that to be true in the past. And we all think of Gandhi and his non-resistance. And when we look at families and we see where there's fighting and infighting and there's a lot of turmoil, well, we see that they just dig their heels in and stand up for what they think is right at the moment. And the next week, they might not even think that was right, but at the moment, they're just being very resisting totally.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happens, there's a great unhappiness in a business or any organization or a home. And so when we learn the art of non-resistance, and we can tell ourselves that it doesn't really matter, or they don't know any better, we can think of something that's really true, mm-hmm. and then live with that, and then not resist. And it makes all the difference in the world in any situation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And even even in the most negative things of life, you know, we think we have to fight wrong in life. But in fact, the fighting or the struggle really mm-hmm. creates more struggle.
Yes.
And so when we get out of the fight mode, and I think for us, especially in the West, you know, we've been taught that we really need to stand up for our rights and stand up for good and stand against all manner of things. And of course, I think in today's environment, we see a lot of kind of a backlash of that way of thinking and a resurgence again of social consciousness, mm-hmm. which is wonderful. But in that process, at least I come across a lot of people that I talk to, especially on the counseling side, who are just resisting so many bad things in life, you know, that they want to stand up for the bad, against the bad, and against the evil and against the wrong. And in fact, we can stand in a non-resistant way, both for good and for bad, and allow the circumstances and situations of life to wash over us. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about situations where we do need to stand for something, mm-hmm. but in many instances we waste our energy. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about the fact that we only have some energy is a dynamic of mm-hmm. That we have, an inner resiliency of being. And so often, and I know you talk to as many people as I do, and so many people come to us and say, I'm so tired. Yeah. I'm so tired. I'm just weary. And they're so tired and they're so weary because of the struggle. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we try to help people to understand is, for heaven's sake, stop struggling. You know, if you stop struggling, your life will be much better. And one of the examples that I give at the church and give in my lectures quite often is that we spend our lives seemingly trying to go get on an escalator that's going up, and we're trying to go down. And all we need to do is get on the other escalator and ride. And instead, we want to struggle against the tide of what's happening. And I think it is true that things are happening to us all the time, not only in our personal lives, but in the world. And because of that, we do feel sometimes out of control. But then I guess that's another issue where we need to give up control, isn't it?
Yes, we need to be firm in our convictions, but not to fight out and lash out at the other person. And there's a big difference in how we stand up for what we believe in. Mm-hmm. We can just, I was telling you earlier about my little grandson who's only 21 months old, and he screams for me to do things with him and for him. And sometimes I say, no, I'm not going to do that. It's my turn. I'm going to read. And I'll tell him what I'm going to do, whatever it is. And he sometimes just looks like that and then goes over and plays with his toys. And sometimes he continues being a little demanding, but it doesn't change me at all. And I don't get upset with him nor say anything hateful. I just say, no, I'm not going to do that. And that's a good example of how we can address all the problems in life and other adults and in the workforce and so forth. We can just say, I don't understand that. I mean, we can make simple statements without getting our ire up. And when we act angry, then it creates anger in the other person, and they it's the fight or flight syndrome. So then they have this fight coming up within them. But if we just stay calm, and we don't want to be doormats with other adults and other people, or at work or any other time, but we just need to be firm and strong in our conviction without showing negative energy and bringing forth negative energy. And there's a big difference there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And that negative energy is what depletes us. Positive energy empowers us. And, the wonderful thing that we see in people is, so often we'll see people who are able to do just tons of things and do everything, and people marvel at how they can do so much and they don't seem to get weary. And another person does only a few things and they're tired all the time. Well, it has to do with that reality, that depletion of energy and that depletion of stamina. And of course, fighting is one of the hardest way, or one of the quickest ways to burn up our energy. But of course, as we're able to deal with the realities of life and say, this is what's happened. It's not the way I want it to be. It's not the way it ought to be, but it's the way it is. And I think, that as I'm thinking now of the number of people we talk to who have children, I'm thinking of teenagers. And so often I say to people, well, they've done what they've done. And so now what you need to do is to deal with that reality, not to fight against the wind, and in so many instances, that's what happens. We become confrontive, and especially with youth, or especially in our relationships. And when we become confrontive, that negative energy comes and the energy drain begins, and you're absolutely right. It becomes contagious, and then we fight. And of course, we know in the world, diplomacy is the best way. And of course, if we could live in the same way, in a non-resistant fashion, and not go to war, but instead be diplomats or statespersons, then things begin to happen in a positive way. And in some instances, we just need to say, well, this has happened, and it's not right, and it's not the way it ought to be, but let's just leave it for a minute. And I think that's very hard in our personal relationships. And I find it's very hard for parents to be able to do that. They need to lash out right now and to assert themselves. And of course, all that's happening is they're laying the groundwork for a really, really confrontive issue, and they're alienating themselves and their children, and they're creating an environment that's going to be counterproductive.
Yes, and when we deal with our children, regardless of what age they are, if we're more consistent, if we're consistent, then they accept what we're saying far more readily, and they don't argue as much because they know that we're going to be consistent. And if we can be non-combative and non-emotional, then also they're more apt to go along with it. And that's true in the workplace as well. You and I have both seen people who hate their work, and they're so upset because the people around them that they work with are not fun to work with, and they don't understand them. Well, that's okay if we don't understand them. They don't have to understand them. All they have to do is get along and work. And if they would just do their work while they're there, the very best they can, and then forget the emotions and the personalities and so forth, and not take it home with them. There was years and years ago, I read an article that I followed, and it said, when I leave work, I hang my problems on a bush outside where I work, or when I get home, I hang them on a bush. And so that was like 40 years ago that I read that, and I started doing that because I was working in public at that time. And just recently, someone sent me a note on the internet, this is how I handle my problems. And it was that exact same thing, as if it's new. But there's nothing new under the sun. It's all the same. It's all the same. And so we just need to observe how other people manage and then follow suit. And just because if we don't like our work, then for one thing, we need to find other work. But if we can't speak well of our boss, then we shouldn't be working for that person. But sometimes circumstances are such that we need to. But we just need to detach. If we detach from the problems and detach from the emotions, then everything seems so much more lovely, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Detachment and non-judgment are the two issues that come to mind when I think of non-resistance. We need to detach from the circumstance and situation, and we need to not judge. And of course, we're great judges, aren't we? We want to judge. And so if we can give up judgment, and then of course the next step to giving up judgment is giving up blame. So there's nobody to blame, there's nobody to judge. And if we just would accept life the way it is, and then act and react as we should appropriately, then so many positive things would happen for us and in us. And I think it has great spiritual value as well. And we know that as a spiritual principle. And we teach it from a spiritual principle, that this dynamic of non-resistance. And a part of non-resistance to us is we don't proselytize. We don't go out and try we
Exactly.
don't go out and evangelize. That's not a
Yes.
part of our theological background, and you and I don't believe in that. People come to us because they're attracted to the teaching. They're attracted to the way in which we are able to show people
Mm-hmm.
how their options operate in
Mm-hmm.
life. And so the other side of evangelization is, or apologetics, if you want, in theology, is to go out and convince, is to resist the
Yes.
other people and tell them how they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're not about telling people, and that goes to the heart of judgment, and it goes to the heart, and then it goes to the heart of blame, and it separates people instead of pulling people together.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way that we can evangelize any course, any cause, whether it's religious or otherwise, is not with our mouths, but with our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and with the demonstration of our lives. And great spiritual leaders have always known that. And so I think we need to understand that from a religious standpoint. We need to understand it from a psychological and mental
Mm-hmm.
standpoint. And we need to understand it from the standpoint of our own, of every aspect of our being.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and when we do understand it, we're able to live it more fully. And if we understand other people's problems, and if we take time just to realize that that person has a lot of problems in their lives, and it's probably just reflecting onto the problem at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and it has really not very much to do with the problem at the moment. It's a lot of other extenuating circumstances. And then we can be more detached and be more realistic about why people are acting the way they do. And another thing, we don't need to figure out why people are acting the way they do, because perhaps they don't even know why they're acting the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
All we have to do is not resist, and to be outgoing and accepting of other people. And as you said, non-judgmental. Because if we're able to do that, it reflects into the other person, to the circumstances around us. And then they don't have room to fight back. And I remember reading something years ago when my children were small, that if let your children resist you, let your children fight back, because if they don't learn to fight back in the home under those loving circumstances, then they never learn to fight back in the proper way in public life. And I think that's a very good lesson for everyone to know, for young parents to know, or to know in the workplace or wherever we are in public, that as long as we can do that, then it helps the other person to get on with their lives and to know where they're going and what they're going to do.
Right. And it stops the confrontation.
Yeah.
And that is really what we need to do in every aspect of our lives. And in doing that, we need to not resist the circumstances and situations of life, the good and the bad. And that's hard for us to accept, But we also need to not resist the difficulties of life, the challenges of life, or the problems of life. And of course, we often think about the mathematician. The mathematician is the one who solves the problems. And the better he or she gets at mathematics, the harder the problems are brought to him or her. And it isn't that they shun them, they want them. And they say, bring them to me. And that's what we need to be as human persons and as spiritual persons. We need to say, these are the circumstances, bring them on, bring all the problems here, and I'll show you how to deal with them. And the way to deal with them is not to fight them and not even to solve them in many instances, but to accept them and to embrace them and say, this is the way it is, now what am I going to do? And that's always the issue. What am I going to do? Not why, not blame, not judgment. Now, what am I going to do? And then to be guided and directed to do and say the thing that is the most appropriate, the most loving, the most tolerant, and the most embracing of other people. And that's an important dimension of life that is difficult for many of us to understand and embrace.
Yes, it is. But if our demeanor is loving and outgoing and accepting, then it softens the other person's attitude 100%, and it makes the other person then not be able to resist, because if there's nothing to resist, then there's nothing to resist.
Absolutely. If they want to fight and there's no one to fight with, then they have no choice. And so we'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
We would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
The way of non-resistance starts in our minds, doesn't it? And of course, everything we talk about from both a psychological and spiritual standpoint is to go back to the mind and the dynamic of mind. And of course, what we teach in our work is that as we connect our mind with divine mind, as our mind begins to think and be in sync with the divine mind of God, then we're guided and directed in the ways that we should go. And there's nothing mystical or magical about it. It's true for everybody. That connection is there. And so if we believe and understand that connection in all aspects of our lives, then we're always guided to right thought and right action. And I think that connective reality and the understanding, and we always talk about going back to the way that we think and the dynamic of our mind, and we think that that is a fundamental spiritual principle, that mental action is the connection that we have with the divine. So many people think that the connection we have is, when we're in church or when we're in prayer or something, but in fact, we're in connection. We're connected to the divine always and everywhere, aren't we? And we're connected to other people, and we have an obligation to ourselves and others in all aspects of life. And in that process, we need to be non-resistant.
Yes, and that's a lovely reality, the way you just explained it, because that's exactly what happens. And that's why we're able then to be strong in our convictions and strong in our convictions, but not resistant and not pushing other people, but just stand on our own strength. And I think that's what makes, well, not I think, obviously that's what makes good leaders, that's what makes good CEOs, and that's what makes good parents, when they're strong in their own conviction, but they are tolerant when others make a mistake or others don't do it quite the way they would have liked, whether it's our children or employees or whoever it might be. And so as we do that, then we're living, as you just said, through the light of God, and then we're allowing the other person to do the same. And usually they'll come to terms when they're not pushed too hard. Isn't that true?
It's true. And if they don't, then that's none of our business. And I think that's the other aspect of it. It doesn't change our feeling about them, nor does it change the way that we respond or react to them. But this divine connection and this view of the divine, and of course we talk a lot about seeing the divine in everyone, even the worst of people, and not resisting what people do and not resisting how people behave, but instead being concerned only about how it is we act and react to the circumstances and situations of life. The other aspect is, and going back to kind of a practical dynamic, and we always try to share some practical ideas. And again, we talk a lot about health and wellness because we do believe in the connection of the mind to our health and our wellness. We know, and you and I have definite experience with people who have chronic pain and people who have serious pain, both physical, psychological, and spiritual pain, that if we can teach people to not resist the pain, it's much easier to bear, isn't it?
Exactly.
And when we think about even the people who are having serious chronic physical pain, we know, because we've done it, we know that through guided imagery, through non-resistance, that we can help people to deal with their pain so that they can actually deal with less medication on the physical level and go with that pain and go through the pain in a much different way. And we can do it in a practical aspect of the non-physical pain that has to do with our emotions and our hurts and our difficulties in life. But isn't that true, that we can ride out the pain when we stop fighting it?
Exactly. And I was just thinking of two examples of that. One is when I had a toothache years ago. It might have been 40 years ago. And this toothache was on a rhythm. And I was so entranced with the fact that it was on a rhythm because we had a clock in that room that struck on the 15-minute and on the half hour and on the hour. And so I could see that it was that. And so as I was so entranced with that idea, then the pain lessened, and I wasn't resisting it. So it was quite a strong lesson for me that as I didn't resist that pain, it was not nearly as painful. And the other incident I was thinking of, there was some friends of mine. The man happened to be a medical doctor, and he was dying of cancer, and the cancer was in his shoulder and back. And so I sat with him some so his wife could get out of the house. And he and I discussed that. And so I said, you know, that this is true. And he had forgotten that because he was so angry that he was so ill. And why would he have to be that ill? And he's a doctor and he should know what to do. And so he was resisting so strongly. But then when he thought about it, he could see, yes, and he was in such excruciating pain. And so then when he thought about it and worked with it and meditated and worked with it, then the pain lessened immeasurably. Now, there might be people who have extreme pain, I wouldn't know, and nothing can stop that pain. But you know and I know that as a rule, it can be lessened a great deal.
Absolutely. And of course, we never want to judge for other people. And
Of
so we
course.
never want to tell people, you know, don't use medicine or don't use
Oh, of
medications.
course.
And of course, we do a lot of work with people. And you and I have both worked with a lot of people who are in serious pain. And I'm thinking now of a particular person whom you know well who was dying of cancer, in the last stages of cancer, and I had the privilege of working with that person in those last few days, and it was a wonderful experience to be able to work through the pain process with them, and when that resistance to pain and the releasing of the fear stopped the fighting, stopped the aggressiveness, and how that pain is lessened. And of course, we see it too with people with asthmatics, with their breathing, and a variety of other people. And again, we're not diagnosing and we're not treating and we're not telling anyone not to do what their physicians say. But we are saying that in a lot of instances, physical pain can be lessened. And it is lessened by the reality of not resisting the pain and not fighting it and becoming one and entering into this reflective state. And of course, one of the things that I found to be tremendously helpful to the point that many people that I've worked with who were in the final stages of very painful illnesses would ask for guided imagery and guided meditations, so that as they go into a guided meditation, they're able to move their mind from the pain. They're able to relax. And of course, we know that pain comes from contraction. And so if we can lessen the contraction in all aspects, mental and physical, that the pain will be less. And so that process allows them then to become more comfortable in the process. And it works in physical pain, but it also works in emotional pain, and it works in the hurts of life. And if we just could get to the point of understanding that and working with ourselves, and of course we talk often about this inner work that we need to get back to, and we can then begin to not resist. And we're always reminding people not to say that you don't hurt if you hurt. If you hurt, you hurt. And that's all right. There's nothing wrong with it. But there are wonderful things that can happen and wonderful things that any of us can do. And this issue of non-resistance is tremendous.
Yes, and we need to point out that what we're talking about is in meditation is to start with deep breathing, because we have to start somewhere, and the place to start is with deep breathing. And if anyone who's listening right now is experiencing any discomfort, if they would just deep breathe for a few moments and then meditate and go into a time of meditation. But first we need to, and the deep breathing relaxes the body and allows the prana and the oxygen and magnetic earth energy all to equalize within our bodies. And that's what happens as we're relaxed and breathing deeply. And so as we do that, then it relaxes our body, and then our bodies are able to not be pained, whether it's emotional, physical, or mental pain, then it's lessened. And then as we go into the meditation, after having done the deep breathing, we're able then to alleviate that pain immeasurably.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the old adage of counting to 10 when we're angry, right?
Yes.
And it's the same principle as that is if we move our focus, and it goes back to what you said so well a few moments ago when we talked about detachment, and as we've talked in other programs, if we detach from the experience, so we have to detach from it, and what we say so often is detach and rise above it, and that's figuratively, of course. So if we detach and rise from it, rise above it, and so often if we're angry, one of the things we say is count to 10 or take a few deep breaths. And of course, we all are able to use that simple little technique to know how much our lives can be changed. Because if we just calm ourselves down, count to 10, if we just take a few deep breaths, it dissipates the anger. It allows our mind to be clear. It allows us to react in a totally different way. And of course, what we say is that it allows us to connect with divine mind, and then we react in an appropriate way, and we do and say the things that we ought to say and ought to do, and we're guided and directed in the way that we should go. And that's what daily life, that's what the practical aspects of life are about, being able to be guided and directed to say and do the things that we need to do for our good and for the good of others.
Yes, and as we do that, then we lead a more wholesome, happy, healthy life, and our energy reflects out into the atmosphere around us. It permeates our homes, and our homes seem peaceful and tranquil. And when people enter the house, then they note that, and they realize that they're in a place where there's tranquility and peace. And this is what we all want, and we can all have whatever it is we want. It's up to us, and we are truly. We create our own reality, we create our own destiny. And so when we say we create our own reality, well, which reality are we creating? A peaceful, happy environment that's relaxed, or vice versa, where there's chaos? So we would just ask everyone to look to their own lives and see, just as you and I have looked to our own lives many times and still do, and over. And that's the ticket, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as we say so often, we're co-creators with God.
Yeah.
And so we have that creative power and that creative grace and the ability to change and transform our lives. And so we hope that the information, the concepts and ideas that we've shared with you have been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.